Hello, welcome back to another video. This week I tried another limited color palette, this time with only 2 pigments, in a watercolor study to cap off World Watercolor Month. I go over my process, things to consider when mixing warm and cool colors, first impressions on a new brush, and why I love lost edges when painting. Let's get started. The supplies I used include Arch's cold press watercolor paper, Faber-Castell Polychromos pencils in light ultramarine, magenta, and burnt ochre, a Derwent pencil extender, Schmincke masking fluid, a plastic mixing palette, Pebeo Studio Gouache in permanent white, the Daniel Smith watercolor essentials set, and brushes in sizes 12 and 8 round, and a 1-inch flat. Last time I did a limited palette study, I used 2 cool tones and a touch of warm yellow. This time I decided to use a viewer suggestion and picked Pyrrol Scarlet and Phthalo Blue green shade from my Daniel Smith color mixing starter set. Pyrrol Scarlet contains pigment PR 255, which is somewhat staining, non-granulating, and semi-transparent. Phthalo Blue green shade is PB15:3, a highly staining, transparent, non-granulating pigment. In theory, mixing a blue and red will produce a range of purples, like in my first limited palette, but an extra factor was at play this time: neutrality. Pyrrol Scarlet leans warm, while Phthalo Blue green shade leans cool. Their mixtures quickly create neutral grays and dusty purples, which lack the vibrancy of cool and cool or warm and warm mixtures. This can be a strength or a weakness, depending on how you use color and saturation in your work. The other major difference to my first red-blue palette is the fact that Pyrrol Scarlet is semi-transparent instead of wholly transparent. This lets me create rich darks faster, but also means you lose luminosity as you layer more. Anyway, moving into the study itself. After transferring the sketch using the Polychromos pencils, I laid down a layer of clean water and dropped in my lightest colors. These were diluted mixtures of each pure pigment, with blue in the shadows and red in the highlights. This color composition will be carried out to the final study. For now, though, I decided to use masking fluid to preserve the brightest highlights. From there, I gradually built up form, working from light to dark, since you can't go back to the white of the paper once you paint over it, especially with staining colors like Phthalo Blue. In some areas, I kept my mixes saturated by using primarily red or blue, with only a drop of the other color. But in other places, I went straight for the grays. I remember disliking desaturated or muddy-looking colors as a kid. It wasn't until I started studying color theory that I learned to appreciate neutral tones and their usefulness. I've talked about focal points in the past, and learning to concentrate detail and contrast in these areas, but the same can apply to color. If everything is the same saturation and vibrancy in the entire piece, nothing stands out or catches a viewer's attention. By letting the colors fade into deep blue and gray away from the light, I hoped what pops of strong red and blue I kept would look even more vibrant in comparison. Once these layers were dry, I removed the masking fluid with an eraser and started to really solidify the shadows. You might have noticed that I gradually transitioned from my trusty sable hair brush to a new one. This is my first time using a silver black velvet brush, a professional watercolor brush I've heard recommended by many experienced watercolorists. I was a little skeptical at first, since this one size 8 brush costs the same amount as my entire set of round brushes with the purple ferrules you've seen me use from the beginning of my channel. I knew it would be softer, but would there really be a difference that could justify the price? Yes, but there are caveats. The more I painted with this brush, the more I liked it. It holds at least twice as much water, which meant I could cover larger areas with one brush full of paint. This reduced the chances of hard edges or blooms forming when laying down a wash, since I didn't have to reload my brush as many times, so the dampness of the paper stayed more consistent. However, this also meant I had to be careful if I wanted to use it to soften my edges. When I first did this, I didn't wipe off enough water, and back runs would often form, but as I went on, I gradually got the hang of it. The softness also didn't make it ideal for scrubbing or lifting. Since I don't lift much on Arches paper, this wasn't an issue, but it's still something I wanted to mention. I decided to prop the study up at this point. I do this to get a clearer, closer look at my painting. I then started rendering out the faces with more contrast and deeper shadows. From there, I moved my way around the study, working on different areas while others dried. This is when the silver black velvet's most impressive quality came out. Normally, getting fine details like the shadows on her hand would require a size 6 or 4 round brush, but the precise point on the size 8 black velvet made it behave like a detail brush. I actually only needed the size 12 and size 8 brushes for this entire study, which impressed me. Now it was time to solidify the background. I broke out the masking fluid one more time to outline the figures, then went in with the deepest layer of color so far. I flipped the study upside down for this step. Why? It's easier to get an even wash at an angle since the bottom edge of each stroke is guaranteed to be the wettest area, which reduces the chances of hard edges/blooms if you paint top to bottom. This is also where most of the pigment gathers. Since the top of the image was the darkest part of the background, letting the paint flow down naturally when it was upside down made sense. Once the background was done, I could see where I still needed more contrast in the figures. Watercolor dries lighter than it looks when wet, so I often find myself layering more washes than I initially think I need to reach my desired depth. Each subsequent wash softens the edges of the ones beneath. I actually like this effect because it creates lost edges between the forms where the shadows meld together. This is most evident in the cast shadow on the woman's hair and forehead, and her back where it meets the man's hand. I could spend time rendering out every painstaking plane change and detail here, but I let the darkness turn into one shape instead. This brings more focus to places with light and creates less busy shapes overall. However, there were still some areas that needed pops of detail. For this, I used white gouache. Painting over the gouache with watercolor softened the white and made it blend better with the rest of the painting. If I wanted to capture those details with only watercolor, I would have had to mask these areas out. That would be difficult given my masking fluid's imprecise applicator and thicker consistency. While gouache does have a different texture when dry compared to watercolor, it was worth it to add these final details using it. After that, the study was done. Here's the final result. My thanks to the viewer who suggested this color combination. Even though I thought I was already familiar with Pyrrol Scarlet and its mixtures with Phthalo Blue, this study made me appreciate these colors even more for their versatility and neutral mixtures. I hope this was enjoyable to watch. And as always, I hope you create something that brings you joy this week. I'll see you next Saturday with another video. Bye!